In a few moments we're going to go into the locked section of the graveyard. This is called the Covenanters' Prison. Sorry, I've just blinded you. And beyond the gates I'm going to take you inside one of the tombs. It's called the Black Mausoleum, and that is where all the poltergeist activity takes place. But before we go in here, I've got lots of things I need to talk to you about. So far on my tour I've tried to be fairly light-hearted in the storytelling, but at this point of the tour I'm going to change that. Because over the years the stuff that I've seen going on in here is not funny at all. And this is your cut-off point because I'm locking the gates behind us. So you have to decide if you're coming in with me. But it doesn't make sense to go into the Covenanters' prison unless you understand who the Covenanters were. So what I'd like you to do, if you can, is to try and imagine what Scotland might have been like in the 1600s. Now, at the time I'm talking about, England and Scotland had joined together. We were becoming a united kingdom, and it was King Charles I on the throne. When it came to religion, both countries were Protestant countries, but we worshipped in very different ways. In Scotland, most people were Presbyterians, and in England, most people were Episcopalian. So King Charles I decided that to join the countries together, we should all practice the same religion. And because Scotland was the smaller and poorer country, everybody here had to change and become Episcopalian, which didn't go down well in Scotland. So in 1638, a group of people gathered here at Greyfriars, and they signed a document called the National Covenant. It was the very, very beginnings of democracy in this country, because what the document said was that no matter who was in charge of our country, anybody who lived here could practice their religion the way they always had. So the document was passed around Scotland. If you agreed with what it said, you could sign it, and if you signed the National Covenant, you became known as a Covenanter. They formed huge groups of armies called the Covenanters' armies and decided to take their own king to battle, who was by then King Charles II. I'm going to cut a long story short and tell you that the Scots quite tragically lost. 18,000 Scottish lives were lost in a time which is referred to now as the killing times in Scotland. That's 18,000 people killed. And 1,200 of them were imprisoned in here. I have to make this clear because some groups get confused. This was already a graveyard. The tombs that you can see behind me and the ones inside the prison are owned by very wealthy or very important families. The bars are there to stop the body snatchers. They're not prison cells, these tombs. And basically the family who owned the tomb, all their the generations of their family would be buried in crypts underground. So the tombs would have been in there. They're not prison cells. They just converted this part of the graveyard to use as a makeshift prison. So they put 1,200 people in there and forced them to lie face down in the mud for 5 months of Scottish winter. Very little food or clothing. You can see there's not much shelter in there. And then, to make matters worse, if they could get any worse, they put snipers around these walls. So if any of them tried to escape, they would have been instantly killed. Most of them were. So do you know what? In my opinion, it doesn't matter what you believe in when it comes to the paranormal. You're not going to step inside somewhere that's filled with happy memories. Now there was one man responsible for the deaths of the Covenanters. His name was Lord George MacKenzie, or Bloody George MacKenzie as he gets called. Guys, it takes quite a lot to warrant the nickname Bloody in Scotland. You've got to be exceptionally bloodthirsty. He was the king's advocate, and it was his job to think up these tortures. Mackenzie's buried. Just look up behind you. You see the big dome-shaped tomb with like a walnut on the top? That is the MacKenzie tomb. Now, the last thing that I'm here to do tonight to any of you, and I cannot stress this enough, I'm not standing here just now trying to tell you what to believe in. That's not my job, and I'm not that arrogant. What I'm trying to share with you tonight is what I believe in. And personally, I don't think it's a good idea to bury the man responsible for so many of the deaths this close to where so many of the deaths took place. But that's my opinion. The gates were opened up until about 11 years ago. You could walk in if you wanted to. Some really strange things started to happen in the tomb that we're going to stand in. It started off small. It started off that people would walk in and get cold, smell strange smells, or hear noises. All of those things can be explained, but it's not as easy to explain why anybody would leave with marks on their body. Bite marks, scratch marks, bruises. I've seen people come out of here with burns, and eventually somebody was knocked unconscious. Now obviously the council were not prepared to be responsible for people walking in here and just randomly being attacked, so they locked the gates and nobody could go in here. That was until my boss came up with the idea of taking ghost tours in. He'd been a tour guide for years, so he went up to Edinburgh City Council and said, "Can I have the key, please?" The council said, "What the hell do you want to go in there for?" My boss said, "Well, I'll make it very clear to visitors that they're choosing to be there, so we won't be held responsible, and also I'll pay you." That is why we've got the key. We're the only company with access into the Covenanters prison. There's no way of getting in here unless you come on our tour. The joy of that is that if anything is going to happen, it will happen on our tour. But the flip side is that it could happen to one of us. And I'm not excluding myself, because one of the tour guides has been attacked 4 times. Oh. And he's still doing the tours. He's a nutter. I wouldn't. Joking aside, I've got to ask something now. Please, please don't laugh at me, because I have to cover my back legally. Do I have anybody who's pregnant on this tour?